You're on.
All right, guys, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. So our topic tonight is teamwork. So my name is Peter Jan Casper. For those who don't know me, we have Alex Silvers presenting, we have Amanda Horta presenting, Carlo DeStasio presenting, and Dave Thau. Going off of that, teamwork is something that I'm sure everyone's very familiar with, especially if you've played a sport or been in a club in the past. So what is forming? Forming is the first stage of the team building process. It is also considered the introduction phase, being that it's when the initial group members meet and you really establish what your project is at hand. Excuse me. So forming is also considered the easiest part of the whole team building process, being that it really isn't any group work is actually being done. It's more or less just establishing the goals, the objectives, distributing roles, and really getting to know one another. So when does forming occur? Forming occurs at the very initial first meeting. So upon receiving a project or a task, you have to really figure out amongst one another, what you guys are going to be doing and your route about how you're going about it. So what does the team discuss? So amongst this discussion, you guys talk about your backgrounds, your interests, and some of your past experiences. And by doing this, you guys really build a team chemistry and you really get to know one another in order to really keep going. So, wait, what's going on here? The timing's off. All right, I already talked about this. So when you form chemistry amongst one another during the forming stage, it's essential that nobody really gets offended throughout all of it. Now, there's going to be some conflicts of interest, but the ultimate goal of the whole process is to essentially form the chemistry amongst one another so you guys can overcome any challenges or conflicts of interest. So the significance of forming is pretty essential, being that you guys are really establishing these first impressions amongst one another. And I know it might seem, pretty funny, but the first impression amongst your group actually has a lot of significance, being that, you're going to be working with these people, overcoming whatever conflicts come your way. So going off of that, learning in forming, so you have your project at task, and you're really figuring out how is your route going about it. You establish your objectives. You distribute your roles amongst one another based off of your strengths and weaknesses, and you establish both short and long-term goals that you want to achieve throughout. So the team informing. So team informing, it's very team-centered, so it just doesn't rely on one person. Granted, a leader might have a lot of focus throughout all of it. It really relies on the individual that, you guys work together in order to build the team. So when you form focus, I know I mentioned it previously, but there's actually no physical work being done, and rather it's really just getting to know one another. And you're establishing a feeling amongst one another so you guys can continue to build upon your team chemistry and work together. An example, like when we're up here. So a forming plan, you're finding out information about one another, you're establishing your goals and objectives, and you're really working together to figure out how's your route going to go about it, and you set it into motion. And ultimately, you figure out the proper way to work together. So the leader in forming, this is the most significant role throughout all of forming and throughout the whole process of a team. It should be very clear, and you should have a sense of direction based off of what the leader tells you. And the leader shouldn't just be a boss, but it should be someone who has positive emotions and is able to stabilize you throughout. Now, the leader's responsibilities, he or she establishes the roles throughout the whole entire process. Any confusion that might run through your mind, he's able to clear it, or she. And like I mentioned just before, he or she always has a positive mindset throughout. So the leader's role, establishing the team goals is very key, because in order to understand the project at task, if you don't have any goals, you don't really know a way of fulfilling it. So with that being said, the leader gives you guys the route for the direction that you're going to go throughout the whole entire project or task at hand. So, who's involved? Everyone's involved. It doesn't really rely just on the leader. Granted, the leader might pick up everyone's slack, but it really accounts for each and every individual to work together in order to be a team. So, like I was saying, everyone contributes. So, it's essential to determine everyone's role amongst the group. The leader helps and eases the burden throughout the whole entire process, and he distributes the roles amongst one another and delegates responsibilities based on each team member's strengths and weaknesses. So how does he establish or she establish it? He establishes it through setting the goals and the objectives, and then, like I just mentioned, really finding out the strengths and weaknesses off of one another based on what you guys learned from the initial phase, when you start building the team chemistry, and it leads to establishing team norms. So forming reliability, you really need to be dependent on one another, and you really need to let the leader guide you throughout the whole entire process. You can't really essentially rely on him to do the work, but just to keep your mindset, on a straight edge so you can work efficiently. So individually forming, you have a tendency to work together, but at times there might be tendencies to work selfishly. So initially there might be an uninformed conflict of interest amongst one another, but that's okay during the forming phase because it is just a forming phase. So growth from forming, bad is good. It's okay to be uncomfortable during the initial phase, being that any conflict of interest ultimately is going to create growth. And regardless, any growth is going to lead to success because you learn from your mistakes and you build upon them. All right, and I'd like to introduce Amanda. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, I'm Amanda, and I'm going to be talking to you about storming. So what storming is, that's the next stage that a team goes through. And I want you to think about if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, and the honeymoon phase, the beginning of the relationship, that's the time where everything's really great, you're obsessed with the person, you think they're absolutely perfect, but I'm sure as many of us know, that phase doesn't last for long. As you start to get to know the person, you find out little things about their personality or habits they have that you might not like and might cause conflict in the relationship. That's what the storming phase is like. The storming phase can cause a lot of conflict between team members if they have different working styles or their personalities don't match. And a lot of teams don't make it out of the storming stage. It's very possible that a team might not be able to work through their issues and they might have to separate and possibly regroup. So for example, up there you can see a picture of me and my sister. I love her to death. She's a year under me. We look like best friends in that picture. We can't work together. We took a college class together once and tried to do this project. And I thought it would be a great idea having my partner live in the same house as me, because if she wasn't doing her work, I could just tell my parents and they'd yell at her. Turns out it was an awful idea. She's very detail-oriented, I'm very big picture. It just didn't work. We did not get a good grade on the project, so we can't work together. It just doesn't work out that way. Where you guys might have seen storming, even just dealing with this project in groups, could be where we got together, we got in our groups, we changed our seating arrangement based on those groups. So throughout the whole semester, we were kind of in the forming stage. We were getting to know each other, and then as we become, as your group members become not strangers, and people as you know better, then that leads into the storming stage. Because now that we're not strangers, people are more comfortable sharing their opinions and ideas, and not everybody's opinions match. So when that happens, it can cause issues. So when your differences become more relevant, that's when issues can happen. People might disagree, someone might want everybody else to do all the work, or someone might be controlling. And when that happens, the pressure of the due dates coming, because everybody knows, you don't start working on the project when it's assigned. As the due dates get closer, more stress happens. It's getting close to finals time, we all have a lot of things due, so that can put pressure on the group that causes them to fight and argue. Sometimes, like our teams we have for this class, there's no designated team leader. So what you're going to see happen throughout the storming stage is the more dominant members of the group are going to come out and they're going to try and take the spot as team leader, which could fight for power. Another thing that could happen is there could be no dominant people in your group, and you just have a lot of people who are more laid back and reserved, and nobody steps up as leader. And both of those can be issues and cause a lot of frustration. Trying to work together, it's really important if you are a person who steps up as a team leader to try and manage everybody's skills according to plan. And then if you are in a team with a specific team leader, it's that team leader's role to really make sure that they are managing everyone correctly. They really have to keep an eye on everyone because, like I mentioned with the dominant members of the team, they could just take over and be doing all the work. And if your team leader's not paying attention, they're not going to notice that. And then your more reserved members of the group could have amazing ideas, but nobody's ever going to hear them because the more dominant members are taking over and the team leader's not paying attention to anyone. Another issue that could come with the team leader is if they take a way too aggressive approach and it discourages their team members. Another thing could be if they don't realize that the team leader could think that they're doing a good job, but really if they give someone too much work that they can't handle and that person doesn't want to speak up, they could be stressing and their performance could show in their performance. And the storming phase also deals with a lot of competition between team members. Everybody wants to look like the best, everybody wants to contribute the most. I mean, at least me personally, nobody wants to look like the team member who doesn't do anything, because I know I've been in groups where I'm not a fan of that person who kind of just wants to take the easy road, let everybody else do it. So if you're not being a good team leader, you could kind of have possibly like a mutiny situation on your hands, and people who think that they could do your job better may try and take your position as team leader, which you don't want that because that could cause a lot of issues, especially if you're in a team where there is a designated team leader. So that if all of that's happening, that causes a lot of stress, that causes a lot of issues, and if you're failing as a team leader, then your members aren't going to know what to do, and you've essentially failed them. So you don't want stressed team members, because the more people who are stressed, it just creates problems for people. If you have too many things on your plate, you want to make sure you're giving out tasks evenly, that people are handling the work that they know they can handle. You're giving out the work that people know they can handle. You don't want to give someone too much. You want to listen to your team members and pay attention to everything. Another example, that is me and all of my coworkers. Storming doesn't just happen for teams that were just formed and are brand new. I started working for my dad's insurance office about 1.5 years ago. And when I came into that situation and that group, there was already 4 of my coworkers who had been working together for about 1.5 years. So they had already gone through the storming stage, all of the stages, and they were a team. But throwing me in there, it created a huge issue. For a long time, I was treated as the boss's daughter. Nobody wanted to yell at me, nobody wanted to do anything. And it wasn't until I actually was late to work, I believe it was twice in a month, and my dad fired me. And he rehired me a month later, but it wasn't until I was rehired that they looked at me as a fellow coworker and not just the boss's daughter who could get away with anything. So because of that, we went through a storming phase. It doesn't just have to happen in the beginning of putting a group together. So we went through a trial, because even when I came back, we still had to figure out how things were going to work. Working in a small office like that, I worked with 4 people. So tasks and everything had to be divvied back up. So in conclusion, with the storming stage, personalities can clash. Not every team gets out of it. And conflicts arise, but it's important to just keep going. So now I'm going to pass it on to Carl, who's going to talk about norming.
Alright guys, my name's Carl and I did the norming phase. In the norming stage, what happens is the team starts to take responsibility and use their ambition to achieve a common goal. They put their differences aside, trust starts to build, and all this stuff starts to happen. People start to build tolerances for one another. It's hard to build tolerances for one another, especially when you get plopped into a team and you don't really trust anybody just yet. But those tolerances start to dissolve and those differences start to go away, all in pursuit of achieving the goal that is set for the team. The team starts to realize what's good and what's bad. For example, if I'm in a team with my team here and I miss a deadline, that's obviously a bad move. The team starts to realize these things, and realizes that it's not acceptable to do these things within a team.